I sat alone in the living room of our family home that humid summer evening, the fan whirring lazily overhead but doing little to ease the thick, sticky air that wrapped around everything like a second skin. This was the same house where I'd grown up, filled with all those familiar corners and childhood memories, and now I shared every single one of them with my of 8 months, my stepmom, Eleanor. She had re-entered my life like a quiet storm after their whirlwind marriage, occupying the bedroom right down the hall from mine, claiming her spot at the kitchen counter where our paths crossed every morning in those careful, polite exchanges, and settling onto the couch where we used to watch TV like to strangers slowly learning to be some kind of family. That night she walked in from the shower, wrapped only in a thin white robe that still carried the faint damp warmth from the steam, her hair slightly tousled from the towel, and our eyes locked across the dimly lit room. One sultry glance, slow, heavy-lidded, her lips parted just enough to show the wet shine of her tongue, hijacked my entire brain in that single, unexpected moment. No words, just this rush of heat flooding my chest, making my heart hammer against my ribs in a way that left me breathless. I looked away first, my face burning with sudden shame, telling myself it was nothing, just the humidity or the long day catching up to me. But the hook was already in, buried deep, and I could feel it tugging at parts of me I thought were safely locked away. The family home suddenly felt too small, too intimate, like the walls had shrunk overnight to make every space feel shared in the most dangerous way. Every hallway, every doorway placed her structurally right next to me, socially forbidden, legally my stepmother, yet physically unavoidable no matter how I timed my movements or avoided the common areas. That single glance lingered like a burn on my skin, warm and insistent, refusing to fade even hours later. I could still feel the way her eyes had dragged over me, slow and heavy with that unspoken weight, and the air between us thickened with something I refused to name, something that made the silence feel loaded. I told myself it was just a look. Nothing had happened, yet my pulse refused to settle, already rewriting every routine we shared, turning the mundane into this quiet undercurrent of tension that I couldn't quite escape. Next morning we were in the narrow kitchen making coffee, the same ritual we'd done 100 times before, the aroma of fresh grounds mingling with the morning light filtering through the blinds. She reached past me for the mugs on the top shelf, her body leaning in close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her, and her hip brushed mine, soft, warm, unavoidable in that cramped space. The accidental touch lasted half a second longer than it should have, the contact sending a jolt through me like electricity I wasn't ready for. My body registered it immediately, every nerve lighting up as I froze for that brief instant. I muttered sorry and stepped back as much as the kitchen allowed, trying to create some distance, but the heat of her skin stayed printed on me, lingering like a mark I couldn't brush off. Inside my head, the first crack appeared, sharp and uninvited. "Shess, Dad's wife. This is nothing. Stop." Yet, as the coffee machine continued its steady gurgle, filling the small kitchen with its familiar sound, I couldn't stop my thoughts from spiraling back to that sultry glance from the night before, how it had made the air feel heavy then, just like it did now. The shame crashed over me in waves, hot and relentless, because this was wrong, so wrong. Dad trusted us both, saw us as family, and here I was letting one glance and one simple brush in the kitchen stir up feelings that had no place here. My mind split between the need to stop this before it started and the undeniable pull that made my breath come shorter, my hands a little unsteady on the counter. I swallowed hard, the internal war splitting me into one voice screaming restraint, the other whispering about the way her warmth had felt, the way that glance had unlocked something I couldn't lock back up. The kitchen felt impossibly narrow, her presence filling it completely, the proximity creating this almost moment where nothing happened but everything felt possible. Her fingers grazed the edge of the mug near mine as she handed it over, and in that fleeting contact the tension escalated, the internal war raging louder, leaving me wondering if this was the start of something I wouldn't be able to ignore much longer. The heat from her touch still burning as I stood there, pulse racing, the forbidden gravity already starting to take hold. That night the house settled into its usual hush, but sleep refused to come anywhere near me. I lay there staring at the ceiling, sheets tangled around my legs like they knew something I didn't. The memory of her hip brushing mine in the kitchen still humming under my skin. "You're disgusting," the voice in my head kept repeating, sharp and cold. "Shess, Dad's wife. He trusts you with everything." Yet every time I closed my eyes, that sultry glance from the night before replayed itself, slow and heavy, pulling the air from my lungs all over again. My body remembered the warmth, the way it had lingered just a heartbeat too long, and the ache refused to leave. Its atlow restless, turning each breath into this sick, secret dance between restraint and something hungrier, something that whispered I could still feel her there even though nothing had happened. Nothing at all. I rolled onto my side, pressing my face into the pillow, trying to smother the thought, but the scent of her cherry blossom lotion drifted in from the hallway bathroom she'd used earlier, faint and sweet and impossible to ignore. It clung to the air like a confession I hadn't asked for, wrapping around me until my chest tightened. Stop, I told myself again, fists clenched at my sides. This is wrong. You're better than this, but the hunger didn't listen. It coiled tighter with every inhale, each breath dragging me a little deeper into the loop I couldn't escape, shame and want twisting together until I didn't know which was louder. 2 days slipped by in this fragile quiet, the kind where every shared glance across the breakfast table felt loaded. Then she was in the pantry, stretching up on her toes for a box on the top shelf, her fingers brushing empty air. I stepped behind her without thinking, the narrow space leaving no room for hesitation. My chest grazed her back as I reached over, the contacts soft and electric, and my hands found her waist to steady her. They lingered there a heartbeat too long, thumbs brushing the curve through her thin shirt, feeling the warmth of her skin right beneath. She didn't pull away, not even an inch. "Thanks, sweetie, sweetie," she whispered, voice low and close enough that her breath brushed my ear. The word landed differently now, too intimate, too charged, like it carried a secret we both suddenly understood. My fingers burned where they touched her, the heat traveling up my arms and straight into my chest. I stepped back slowly, the box in my hands suddenly heavy, and we both knew this time the violation hadn't been accidental. Mine, hers, ours, every evening after that the scent of her cherry blossom lotion became my undoing. It would drift down the hall when she passed my door on her way to bed, soft and blooming, triggering the memory of her body against mine in that pantry until my stomach tightened and heat pooled low. I started noticing the way she moved through the house, the gentle sway of her steps, the way light caught her hair when she paused at the window. My gaze followed her now, uninvited, dangerous. Even simple conversations over dinner felt edged with it, every word carrying that low throb beneath the surface, making my voice catch when I answered her. The ache was constant, a quiet pulse that turned the air between us thick and alive. I was obsessed, wearing her scent like a second skin I couldn't wash off, and the internal war raged on in the dark hours, restraint screaming at me to stop while the hunger kept pulling me closer, breath by trembling breath. Then tonight, as I stood in the hallway listening to her move around in the living room, the pull sharpened again, leaving me frozen with my hand on the doorframe. The next morning Dad headed out early for his 3-day business trip, leaving the house feeling suddenly vast and intimate all at once. By evening we were in the kitchen together, pasta water steaming on the stove, a bottle of wine open between us, and that old slow song from our family road trips years ago drifting low from the radio. The melody curled through the room like it remembered safer days, but tonight it only made the air feel thicker. Closer. I stood at the stove, spooning sauce in awkward circles, and she laughed under her breath, the sound soft enough to make my chest tighten. "Let me fix that," she said, stepping right beside me, her hand sliding over mine on the wooden spoon. Our fingers overlapped there, warm, unmoving for one long heartbeat, her skin brushing mine as we stirred together slow and steady. The heat from the pot rose between us, but it was nothing compared to the quiet spark traveling up my arm, her shoulder grazing my sleeve, her breath steady and warm near my neck. We carried the plates to the table and stayed there longer than we needed to, knees brushing under the wooden small, repeated touches that sent tiny currents through me. The wine softened her words, made her eyes linger on mine across the candle flame, longer each time, like she was seeing past the usual labels we wore. The shared meal had turned heavier without either of us naming it, the space between stepmother and something else thinning to a single trembling thread. Later we stood side by side at the sink, warm water running over the dishes, and I gripped the counter edge until my knuckles whitened, the storm inside me raging louder. "This is wrong, she's married to Dad. You're going to break everything if you let this keep going." But that first sultry glance kept flashing behind my eyes, uninvited, and the faint cherry blossom trace on her skin as she passed me another plate left my throat dry, every breath dragging heavier, pulling me under. Desire was winning the quiet war inside me, each heartbeat drowning the guilt until it felt distant. Faint, I was losing myself in her nearness, in these small collisions of warmth and breath, and I hated how right it felt, how the empty house suddenly didn't feel empty at all. The second night, Dad still gone, she rubbed her shoulders after a long afternoon in the garden and asked me quietly for a private favor. "They're killing me. Would you mind just working the knots out?" Her voice carried that hesitant trust, and I told myself it was nothing, just helping, as I sat on the edge of her bed while she settled in front of me. The thin silk of her nightgown draped soft over her shoulders, and I placed my hands there, thumbs pressing slow circles into the tight muscles beneath. Warmth seeped through the fabric, alive under my touch, and she sighed deeply, steam slipping out on her breath in a way that made everything inside me clench. "Right there," she murmured, the sound low and unguarded, her body easing back just slightly into my hands as the tension gave way. It wasn't accidental anymore. This touch had become intimate, deliberate, my fingers moving with a purpose I couldn't pretend away, the last wall inside me starting to crumble piece by trembling piece. Her breathing deepened, slower now, the air between us thick with everything we weren't saying, and as her head tilted back a fraction more I felt the pull sharpen again, the thread between us fraying fast. Wondering how much longer either of us could keep pretending this was still just a favor, we didn't stay on the bed long after that. The air between us had grown too thick, too charged, so we drifted downstairs like sleepwalkers chasing the same dream. The living room waited with its low radio hung, that same old song still circling slow, the one that always played when Dad was away. I reached for the second bottle without asking, uncorked it with hands that weren't quite steady, and poured until the glasses glowed dark and full under the lamp. Her robe brushed my arm as she sank onto the couch beside me, knees drawn up, close enough that the cushion dipped and pulled us nearer. Dad's absence pressed in from every corner, the secrecy of these empty nights loosening every last restraint we'd clung to for months. The stolen glances, the garden favor that had never been just a favor, the way her breath had caught under my thumbs upstairs, it all collided now, heavy and sweet and impossible to outrun. She looked at me then, that exact sultry heat from the very first night flooding her eyes again, the kind that had hijacked my brain and never given it back. Her voice came out low, trembling on the edge of a confession. "I can't stop thinking about you either." The words landed soft between us, collapsing everything left of my resistance in one quiet crash. No more fighting it. The wine, the song, the weight of all those almost touches. It simply gave way. I drew her onto my lap right there on the couch, the movements low and certain, her weight settling against me like gravity had finally won. Her robe shifted with the pull, silk whispering open just enough to let warmth spill through, bare skin so near it made my breath hitch sharp. Our mouths met in that moment, hungry and desperate, years of forbidden tension exploding into one trembling collision that left us both reeling. The ache of it flooded me, her fingers pressing hard into my shoulders, holding on as if the world might tilt away. We were past the point of no return now, bodies pressed so close the air between us burned, breathing ragged and shared. The sultry glance that started everything dragging us straight into the fire we pretended we could walk away from. She pulled back just far enough to lock eyes with me, her voice shaking with the same raw need that had wrecked me from the beginning. "Take me. Right now." Those words snapped the last thread holding the house together. I lifted her then, arms wrapping around her like she belonged there, carrying her down the hall toward her bedroom while the radio song faded behind us. The door clicked shut with a soft finality that echoed through the quiet rooms, sealing everything we'd crossed exactly where the desire had always been headed. But even as the latch caught and the world narrowed to just us, a hollow ache bloomed deep in my chest, cold and familiar. Dad would come home tomorrow, the house would fill with normal voices and routines again, and this secret would sit between us like smoke that never quite clears. I held her there in the dim light, for heads touching, breath still uneven, wondering if the wanting would ever ease or if it would simply change shape, haunting us both in stolen glances across family dinners and quiet evenings.